Hey everybody, welcome back to the Echo Leadership Podcast. My name is Andy Wood and I'm your host. We're focusing this month on getting better as a leader. Now, we are always focused on that as a podcast, but we're narrowing our conversation this month because we're in the middle of a crisis. This is Q3 2020. It's right in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. It's right in the middle of a movement for racial justice in our nation, and never has it been more important to lead, to get better as a leader. And leadership is shining. And also there are places where we are seeing people not lead very well. I believe with all my heart that when leaders improve, it changes everything. It changes communities, it changes businesses, it changes families. Leadership is of utmost significance. People want to follow you when you're the kind of leader who's getting better. So we're looking specifically, how do you see yourself as one of the greatest assets that you can bring to your team? And how do you see your leadership as something that you can improve? There are practical things that you can do. There are steps you can take. There are exercises and habits that you can apply to your leadership. So I want to give you two practical ideas. Before I do, thanks again to those of you who are sharing, those of you who are subscribing, rating, reviewing. It's really helping us get the word out. Great things are happening. Also, I want to encourage you to have this conversation with your team. Download the show notes. It will help you further the conversation at your organization or in your family or even in your church. I even know of people who are discussing this with small groups in their church. So it's great content for that. Idea number 3 is this. Now, this is going to seem a little bit counterintuitive for some of us, but I have found this to be very helpful for me as a leader. And it's this. It's to shrink your number of growth goals. So I want to encourage you as a leader to have 1, maybe 2 growth goals that you're focused on at any given point. What I have found is that if I'm trying to improve too many things at once, I don't improve anything. If I'm trying to get better in 5, 6, 7 areas as a leader, I'm not able to take the energy that's required to improve one area of leadership. So I have found it to be helpful to take a quarter or one specific chunk of time, usually about 3 months, and focus on some key skill that you're trying to get better at. So for me last quarter in Q2 of 2020, specifically, I wanted to get better at writing. So I listened to some seminars, I watched some videos. I actually wrote a 40-day encouragement for our church as we're journeying through a project called the Hope Project. For me, that was my area of focus. Now, right now in Q3, I'm focused on leading through an executive team, and I'm also focused on understanding what is happening in our country around racial injustice, around racism. That's my area of focus right now. What I have found when you narrow the focus, you're able to get gains more rapidly. I want to encourage you to think, what if you could get 1 to 2% better every single week in one area for a given period of time? How much of a difference could that make over the long haul? So over the last several years, there have been different focuses for me. I focused for a while on getting better at looking at a camera. I focused for a while at getting better at my vocal intonation and how do I communicate. I've focused at how do I run meetings. I've focused on how do I have difficult conversations. I've had times where I've focused on how do I lead direct reports. I've had times where I've focused on how do I lead up. All of these different areas, when you focus on them, so you read books, you listen to podcasts, you get mentors, you analyze and you get feedback from the people on your team, but narrowing the focus as a leader will help you get better more rapidly. Athletes do this, artists do this. You'll see professional athletes. Tiger Woods, I'm not sure what you think about him, but for a while, he focused on one area of his game. Some professional athletes will focus on basketball players say, I'm going to get better at free throws. I'm going to get better at 3-pointers. And they'll do it for 90 days or a season, and they'll get rapid gains. So here's a question. This is also a question you could ask people on your team, and it's what one thing, if it got better, would make everything else better? So what one thing for you as a leader, if you improved in, would change everything? And if you narrow the focus on this, it will lift the lid for you. It will help you grow and your team grow more rapidly. Idea number 3, shrink your number of growth goals. Number 4 is this. Figure out where you are canceling out your leadership. This flows out of a book that I recently read called Scaling Leadership. And then another book I read called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I love that title because there are attitudes, habits, ways of relating to people that have made you successful up until this point as a leader, but they're not the thing that will make you successful for the next year, 2 years, 5 years, decade of your leadership. So you and I have to shift our approach. And I said in the last episode, it gets harder to get better as you get bigger. Most of us, when we make progress early on in leadership, we make progress because we're visionaries, because we cast a compelling vision, because we're passionate. Over the long haul, one of the areas of leadership that oftentimes people will rise in spite of is their poor people skills. And then they get to a point of leadership and people kind of adapt the fact that they're not as good. They're not good listeners. Maybe they speak too much in meetings, and that becomes a deficit to their long-term growth as a leader. So we want to become the kind of leaders that recognize we're constantly doing things that are canceling out our leadership. And the best way I have found to do this is to let the people around you speak into your leadership, to let them have the freedom to say, hey, this is an area where you're canceling your leadership out. A 360 leadership assessment is super helpful. I'm in the process of actually going through one with our team right now, where all of my direct reports and then people that I interact with on a regular basis are speaking into my leadership, even family members, to help me get better as a leader. Here's a few questions that you could do, even if you don't have like a professional 360 assessment. 4 questions, and we'll put all these on the show notes so that you can download them. What's one thing I could improve on as a leader that would make everything better? So ask your team this. I've had this conversation and I get some really good feedback from people on our team. Number 2, what is one way I'm currently undermining my leadership through my attitudes or actions? So what basically I'm saying, what is the thing that when I walk out of the room, everybody's talking about? What's the thing that I'm doing that's not helping? This could be things like in my environment, you're speaking too long. So I'm a pastor and I have a tendency to speak longer than I should. It could be things like perhaps you're teaching and you're not looking at the camera. I had campus pastors say this to me, that you're not looking at the camera enough so we don't feel connected to you. But there are things that you're doing that are canceling out your leadership. The third question is, if you were in my shoes, what's one thing you would do differently as a leader? So you get really good feedback through that question. And then what's one difficult thing you would say to me if you knew I would listen and not get defensive? Those 4 questions will unearth a whole lot that will help you get better as a leader. I think that I've said this already in this podcast, but I think some of the best growth opportunities we have as leaders come from the people that spend the most time with us. You can get more as a leader out of a 10-minute conversation from somebody who's a good leader that spends time with you than you can possibly through 1, 2, 3, 4 books on leadership. This one idea, figure out where you are canceling out your leadership, can make all the difference. So this is idea 3 and 4 of episode 3.3. I want to say thank you again to those of you who have subscribed, rated, reviewed, made comments, helped us spread the word to help more leaders get better. We say over and over, our goal is to help you become the kind of leader that everybody on your team wants to follow. Thank you so much for joining us for the Echo Leadership Podcast.